So we are going to get started. I just want to give a warm welcome to everyone that is on this webinar today. As University of Florida IFAS Extension, we welcome each and every one of you. And we are happy that you're joining us to learn about fertilizing effectively in Florida. We do have a couple upcoming classes if you're interested. We have the micro irrigation for vegetable gardens. For our commercial audience, no CEUs for that one, but definitely great things to learn. So you can scan the QR code. We'll also be sending you links. And then I am offering a GIBMP class in Espanol for our bilingual audience. If you're interested in getting your certification and attending a class in Espanol, we are having it on June 22nd. So, register today for that one. And we did want to just make a quick reminder that we have a lot of great chit chat in the chat box, but if you have a question, please put it in the question and answer section. We do have over 130 people on the webinar, and so we don't want to miss your question. And we can do so by putting it in the question and answer section so that it doesn't get lost in the chat box. So don't forget to do that one. So today we're covering fertilizing effectively in Florida soils, and with a specific focus on Central Florida, where all of us are stationed to work and live. And I'm joined today by Thomas Satcher, who's the Seminole County Fertilizer Educator, Tia Silvasi, who's the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent in Orange County, and Jacques Worley, who's the Strategic Engagement Coordinator for Orange County Environmental Protection Division. And myself, I'm Tina McIntyre. I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent in Seminole County. And so this is a fantastic partnership webinar for the two counties, but also funded and supported by the state and the Environmental Protection Agency. So I know many of you might be eager and interested to know about our continued educational units that we're offering today for free for those of you with a Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services license. We are approved for the following categories, which is limited urban fertilizer, limited lawn and ornamental, limited commercial landscape maintenance, and commercial lawn and ornamental. We are not approved for other categories such as core, so just make a note of that. We also have 2 CEUs available for FNGLA certified professionals. CEUs are applicable to all landscapers in all of Florida, not just Seminole County. They're given to the registered attendee only. So if you are, trying to watch with a group or something like that, that needs to be prearranged in advance to do virtually. And I did not have any of those inquiries. So each person receiving the CEUs needs to be registered, attending the webinar, and so we can see kind of when you logged in, when you logged out, and then that you're participating in the poll questions. And you must have a license as well. So that same person is licensed, registered, and attending. You're welcome to attend the program again and again, but the CEUs are only issued once. So now that we are approved with FDEX, we will be offering this webinar or webinars like this. However, you can only receive those CEUs one time for your license. And they are issued by FDEX and FNGLA. And so after this, you will receive a form, a PDF form that we will email to you, but it's still your responsibility to make sure that you coordinate with FDEX to get those applied accordingly to your license. So, work with FNGLA and FDEX to make sure all that gets finalized. And to be able to be eligible to receive the CEUs, you must be logged in for the full duration of the webinar, which is from 2 to 4 p.m. We will email you a survey at the end of the webinar. So once everything downloads from Zoom, I'll grab all your emails and then I'll send you a survey. You do have to complete that survey. And this is also for those of Seminole County residents interested in receiving a free bag of Florida-friendly fertilizer. You do have to, again, attend the whole time and complete those surveys. We'll also be sending a survey in 3 to 6 months from now. So, no CEUs or fertilizer for that one, but just a courtesy that if you don't mind, when I do email you in 3 to 6 months from now, let me know if you implemented any of these new things that you learned here today. So I will be following up about that. And then just a quick note for our Seminole County residents that are interested in getting that free bag of fertilizer. Since we have been offering this program for many years, we just kindly ask that if you've received a free bag of fertilizer, that you pass on getting another one. And so it's really just one bag per household. And thank you so much for honoring that. So again, I'm so excited today that we're just joined by a whole host of experts here in Central Florida. We're going to be looking at a brief overview of the ordinance, just a quick one. I know it's a long webinar, and so if we do have some people drop off, we want to make sure that we get you those brief bullet points right up front. So we'll start with just a quick recap. Then we're going to go over your landscape and your watershed, lawn and landscape best practices, fertilizer fundamentals and best management practices, and finally, those details of the county ordinance. So Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is a partnership between the University of Florida IFAS Extension and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. It's housed in the University of Florida IFAS Extension as the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and we seek to conserve water, reduce waste and pollution, create wildlife habitat, and prevent erosion, among other things. And we do this through our 9 principles. They have a fantastic website, which includes an app on fertilizer ordinances and many other great resources. So check that website out today. We'll also be providing you that link. So like I mentioned, we deliver the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program through the 9 Florida Friendly principles. It all starts off with right plant in the right place. But as this is a fertilizer class, we can imagine how fertilizer really interacts with many of the principles. So when we put the right plant in the right place, it's going to need less fertilizer to begin with because it's just naturally thriving and happy in an environment that's similar to which it has evolved. And so that's really important. Watering efficiently goes hand in hand with fertilizer, because obviously we need the fertilizer to interact with the water as a slow release product, but we also need to be watering efficiently so that we're not overwatering or getting signs of symptoms and disease. Mulch is great resource to add to your Florida friendly landscape. It helps build that organic material. If you think about a forest, it's naturally constantly mulching itself with those leaves and decay and debris. Fertilize appropriately, we will have quite a section on that. We have recycling yard waste, which is, just something as simple as raking those leaves back onto the turf, back into the landscape beds, and allowing it to degrade naturally rather than sending it to the landfill. Attracting wildlife, we want to think about how we can provide habitat to these creatures because we are rapidly urbanizing. And as we lose natural habitat, we need to create space for them in our neighborhoods and communities. Controlling yard pests responsibly, we recommend integrated pest management and not blanket routine pesticide application. Reducing stormwater runoff and protecting the waterfront. Even if you don't have a waterfront lake house or anything like that, we all live in a watershed, and so everything drains to our lakes, rivers, and streams. So a quick brief interview and overview of the fertilizer ordinances. Well, like I said, today we're here with Orange County. That's Jacques Worley, who's the Strategic Engagement Coordinator, and Tia Silvasi, who's with Orange County Extension, and she's the Florida Friendly Landscape Agent. They do a great job doing fertilizer programming through their trained applicator detail, their green industries best management practices programs, Florida Friendly landscaping classes, and just general public outreach. They did recently pass an update to the Orange County Fertilizer Ordinance. It applies to residential, commercial, and institutional applicators. So we're talking about, obviously residents, HOAs, commercial facilities such as, strip malls, but also institutional applicators. So that includes churches and schools. No nitrogen or phosphorus during the restricted period, which is June 1st through September 30th. No phosphorus year round unless a soil test shows a deficiency. And that's really a Seminole County, a UFIFAS best management practice, which we'll get to later. No fertilizer within 25 feet of natural water bodies. That's quite an increase. Nitrogen fertilizer applied outside of the restricted period must be at least 65% slow release nitrogen. And so that is also an increase from the previous 50%. No more than 3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. And again, you can QR code or click the link to learn more about that recent ordinance. And then for Seminole County, we didn't have any recent updates, but just still the same old ordinance that we've had since 2017. Myself and Tom Satcher are here to help you with any of your fertilizer questions as it relates to Seminole County. And similar to Orange County, no nitrogen or phosphorus in the restricted period, June 1st through September 30th. No phosphorus year round unless the soil test shows it's needed. No fertilizer within 15 feet of any water body. And fertilizer must contain slow release nitrogen during those outside periods. So to start off, we're just going to have a little fun and show our PSA.
Fertilize, fertilize, there is a right way to fertilize, Start a revolution, it's an evolution. You're the one solution to nutrient pollution. Rid your lawn of phosphorus, because that stuff ain't good for us. Slow release, nitrogen, use it right and we all win. Fill your spreader, tell a friend, it's slow release, nitrogen,
Seminole County government and its partners want to remind you to fertilize responsibly. Check out the facts at fertilizeflorida.com.
So as you can see, they're having a lot of fun fertilizing responsibly, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Now I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Tia Silvasi, and she's going to talk about your landscape and your watershed. Take it away, Tia.
Great. Thanks so much, Tina, for helping to organize this workshop class webinar. My name is Tia Silvasi, and I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent with the University of Florida in Orange County. And so Tina just shared about our Orange County fertilizer ordinance, but like, why does this matter is because we want to protect our water bodies. And so in this webinar today, you'll learn about the nutrients and how they're affecting our water bodies. And that's really one of the driving forces for having these ordinances and wanting to provide fertilizer in the right way. So let me try for the next slide. There we go. All right, so the importance of water quality, that's something that some people may not think about in your daily life. You just turn on the spigot and the water just comes out and it's clean and drinkable and fresh and clean, and you might not put a lot of thought about it, but the water quality is very important for human health and for wildlife, and additionally for recreation. So if you enjoy kayaking or fishing or swimming in our springs or lakes, our water bodies here, this is very important. And sometimes the springs are closed because of too much bacteria, or the lakes turn green because of the increased algae growth. So this is very important to us in many factors of our life. So let me just start by explaining what happens in a watershed. A watershed is the amount of water that flows into the river. So if you're on the east side of Orlando, like I am, you might be in the St. Johns River watershed. So all the little streams, they flow into the big river, the St. Johns River, and that will flow out to the Atlantic Ocean. So in a watershed, we get rainfall, and that, gets seeped into the soil. It creates rivers and streams, and it picks up nutrients or pollutants along the way. And so we want this water to be clean. The environment, the trees, the grasses, the shrubs, they help provide filtration to filter out nutrients and pollutants. And some of the water will seep down into the groundwater and into the aquifer too. So pollution problems, we can see this clearly between just a natural water cycle and an urban water cycle, whereas in the natural water cycle, We get rain, there's lots of infiltration. That means the water seeps into the soil and works its way down. And that helps to recharge our groundwater. That helps to recharge our aquifer, like where the springs come from. And it keeps our water clean. The soil and the plants filter out the water. In a urban water cycle, we have a lot of buildings, cars, roads, and there's a lot more nutrients and pollutants, dog poop and stuff, um, uh, things that come off of our cars, oil and gasoline. And we have much less infiltration because of all the concrete. So what happens then is the rainwater carries all those pollutants, and we have more stormwater runoff that's going into our lakes and our streams and our rivers, and it's creating kind of a pollution problem. So some of it still will go into the groundwater and the aquifer, but more of it is, not getting all that filter and percolation. So when we have increased runoff, like in the urban water cycle, this washes those pollutants into our surface water bodies like lakes. Here in Florida, when we get these heavy rains, over the summer, you'll just see like rivers running down the road, and anything that was in there, leaves or grass clippings or cigarette butts or trash, that will go down the storm drain. And so that is not good for our water bodies. It might go to a retention pond, or it might go directly to a lake or a stream, but we want to do our best job to prevent those pollutants from going in there. So here are some nutrient sources. This was a study done specifically on the Wekiva Water Basin, and for nitrate, the nutrient nitrogen, one form of it is called nitrate. So the nitrate loading into the Wekiva Basin. So you can see from this, most of it is actually coming from septic systems. 29% is the largest little pie in the chart here. And there are programs that are helping people to upgrade their septic systems to reduce the nitrate leaching that's coming out of those. But a lot of people don't have control over that, or maybe they can't afford it. So the second biggest piece of the pie is the urban turf grass fertilizer. So fertilizer that people apply to their lawn and landscapes, that is another big part of the pie. And that's something that every resident, anybody who has a yard or a home, they can take part in fertilizing responsibly and reduce that nitrate loading to our environment. Other sources that are smaller, come from our wastewater treatment facilities. That's 16%. The farm fertilizer, that's 11%. Also sports turf grass fertilizer, like athletic fields, also nurseries. And just from the atmosphere, nitrogen comes out of the atmosphere and livestock waste from farms. Here's some examples of non-point source pollution. So non-point is like where we don't know where it comes from exactly. Like there's not a huge factory that has a huge pipe that's coming out that we're just seeing loads and loads. It's more like these small little things, and together they can add up. For example, the fertilizer, the nitrogen and the phosphorus, they impair our water bodies. So in the fertilizer, that's one way. Also the bacteria from animal waste, like dog feces. If you don't pick up your dog waste, that can have, dangerous bacteria and other pathogens, that can end up in our water. Just sediment, like if we have a bare spot and there's a heavy storm, that can take that sediment down into the water body. And sometimes there will be nutrients in that sediment, especially phosphorus likes to attach to soil. And the last thing is just organic toxins like oil and pesticides. For example, you can see those, kind of going here and there, but there's not like a big pipe streaming them out. It's just every car drips a little bit of oil. And so when it rains, that will end up in our waterways. So the water bodies get impaired, and this is how it happens. There's natural things existing in the water. For example, algae is natural, But when excess nutrients enter the waterway, it really increases the algae growth. And so we have increased algae growth, we have increased aquatic weed growth, and that turns the water green. Algae makes it green, and that reduces the water clarity and the water quality. It looks kind of cloudy or murky or green. That can also lead to fish kills, which can also lead to loss of recreation. Like, you don't want to take your boat if it's all full of weeds and algae. You don't want to swim, or maybe the fish are no longer safe to eat in that case. So this is just kind of the cycle of how it happens. So next we're going to launch a quick poll here on the Zoom. And so there will be a pop-up, and you can answer the question in the pop-up on the screen. The question is, improper fertilizer use can lead to fish kills. Is that A, true, or B, false? Okay, here we have it popped up now. So the poll on the pop-up of your screen, if you can fill it out there, and preferably not in the chat box unless you can't see the pop-up. So
Yes,
the question,
I was just going to add to you, sorry, we won't be able to record it. So be sure that you're putting your answer through the
on the
through the
Zoom.
poll, not the chat.
Yeah, so there's a pop-up window in the Zoom poll. If you're having trouble with it, type to us in the chat. But the poll question is, improper fertilizer use can lead to fish kills. Is that A, true, or B, false? So go ahead and fill out the poll on the Zoom. And I see some people are saying that the poll isn't working for you. So maybe just like minimize your window. It is like a pop-up window. So you might have to make sure your cookies are unblocked or something like that. But if you can answer in the Zoom poll, we prefer that. If not, you can put it in the chat, but we won't be able to record your answer there. Oh, I see Beth found it. Okay, great, Beth.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I just want to reiterate, if you're receiving CEUs, we do need your participation in the poll questions. So just to make sure you're participating, if you're having any issues, you can always just pop it in the chat, but the go-to is in the poll area though.
Great, thank you, Tina. So thank you for all responding. We're going to go ahead and close the poll now and continue on with the class. All right, so next we're going to talk about Florida-friendly landscaping principle number 8, which is to reduce stormwater runoff. And this is what I've been talking about keeping the water clean, reducing the nutrients and pollutants and chemicals from entering in the water. And so a couple of simple things that you can do is add some downspouts and direct that into your lawn or landscape. Add rain barrels that will store some water and save it for later use. Berms and swales are another good earthworks type of thing to create in your yard, especially if you're on a lakefront or something. And also rain gardens, just a depression to hold that water and let it sink into the earth a little more. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here on each of these. So the downspout, so all this water is coming on your roof of your house. And then if you have gutters, it's coming down the downspout all in one way. So this picture here is how not to do it. We do not want to direct the downspout onto the driveway, which is a paved surface, and send it on out into the road. What we want to do instead is we want to direct the downspout into the lawn or the landscape. And here the plants, the grasses, the shrubs, the trees can utilize the water for, irrigation, for watering, for like the rainfall, catch that. But also their roots are filtering out any kind of pollutants or nutrients. And so that's cleaning the water as it's making its way down, into our environment. Another way you can do this is direct the downspout into a rain barrel. And so there's many different sizes and shapes of rain barrels. Depending on what county you're in, they might have free rain barrel programs available to you. I teach with Orange County Utilities, and they have a rain barrel program. You can sign up for the next class by going to their website. Also, some utility companies will give you a rebate for installing a rain barrel, like maybe give you $50 off of your next bill. So the purpose of the rain barrel is to catch that water coming from your roof and store it. And it will store it in the rain barrel, however big it is, 55 gallon, you can get one like 1,000 gallons, or a small, even a 5-gallon bucket, can do something. And so this is collecting the water. You can use it to water your plants or wash off your tools. And this also captures some of that nitrogen from the atmospheric deposition that you can use to water your plants. The rain gardens is a very low tech option, and all you're doing is kind of digging a little depression, and that way the water runs off of your roof and down the downspout, and then it kind of goes into a little puddle or like pond that's filled with plants. And so the plants are then soaking up that water and any nutrients or pollutions, and so it can look beautiful. It can help store some of that water, and it's another strategy to reduce stormwater runoff. So the berm and the swale is the low part where the water is, like a ditch. And then the berm is the high part on either side of it. And so this is something you can do manually with a shovel and dig out, or maybe some large properties, the developers might have installed a swale and a berm on your property. It's a requirement even on some lakefronts, because this is going to just trap some of that water when we have those heavy rainfall events. It's going to allow that water to sink down into the ground and filter out all those nutrients and pollutants. So this is another technique that you can use. So another thing we want in Florida-friendly landscaping is we encourage more pervious surfaces. Pervious, permeable, anything that the water can run through, like you see on this picture on the right, like it's little rocks, and they making all these fancy high-tech pavers now, or even permeable concrete where the water will flow through it. And you can get this for your driveway. You can use pavers, or you can use rocks, and that will let the water go through that surface and soak into the ground. So this is good for like walkways, driveways, or kind of low traffic areas, but we don't want to see your whole yard, being like a rock yard. That's not Florida friendly. Now, Florida friendly principle number 9 is protecting the waterfront, and we want to prevent the nutrients coming from the fertilizer and the dog waste from entering the waterfront. And because if you do have an excess of nutrients, it will look like this with the increased algae growth, and it will turn green, and the water will be very nutrient rich. So how we manage this is that we build retention ponds in some of our newer communities. A lot of communities have several retention ponds, and these retention ponds are kind of like the first frontier for capturing the stormwater runoff. Any kind of sediments can settle in here. The plants around the lakefront, the littoral plants, they can absorb the nutrients and help filter the pollutants. And then these stormwater ponds, they often outflow out into a natural water body or into a different retention pond. And eventually, it might run into the St. Johns River or whatever the major water body in your area is. So these retention ponds help reduce pollution, but they're not perfect. This study here shows that the retention ponds in urban areas, they only remove around 50% of the nitrogen, and most of it happens here in the first couple days. You can see, and it's not even quite 50%, but within the first couple days, a lot of nitrogen is removed, a little bit less than 50%, but that means there's still more than 50% that still is remaining in the pond, over the next couple years. So what is the solution to this? Well, we need to prevent the fertilizers and other pollutants going into the pond in the first place. So another way that you can help to prevent the nutrients is to have a nice shoreline buffer or a riparian buffer, a buffer zone, a low maintenance zone. And this is where your water's edge is planted with plants in different types of layers. You can see the pictures on the right, from in the water to getting in the upland and all the way to the normal upland where you have your landscape trees and shrubs. These plants help to filter the nutrients, and they're considered low maintenance zones where you don't have to mow it. You don't need to add pesticides or herbicides. You should have it planted, and this also helps to provide habitat for the wildlife, which is another Florida-friendly principle. When it's cleared and it's just turf grass all the way down to the water's edge, that is not good for the lakefront. You're going to have to mow that grass. You might irrigate it. You might fertilize it. And all of that is going to end up in the water body. And so remember, this is 25 feet in Orange County and 15 feet in Seminole County. So be sure to look up your own fertilizer ordinance. We have an app for that at our state Florida-friendly office, and you can see what the rules are in your municipality. Another way to prevent nutrients is to address bare patches in the landscape. So in this picture here in the middle, you have the turf grass and there's just a bare spot here. And when you get a heavy rain, some of that soil may be carried down into the gutters, into the storm drain, and out into the water bodies. So the solution for if you have a yard that looks like this is just to plant some ground covers. They can be mowable, like this perennial peanut pictured here in the lower right corner, or it can be like mondo grass, which is just a low growing ground cover that grows good in the shade. A lot of times we have these bare spots that are because it's just too shady for normal varieties of turf grass to grow. So try some alternatives to turf. And then principle number 1 is the right plant, right place. Florida friendly principle number 1. This is our overarching principle, because if you have the right plant in the right place, it shouldn't need that much fertilizer. It should do well in your site in Florida here. So no fertilizer can force a plant to grow in an unsuitable environment. So example, if you bring a plant up from Pennsylvania, like where I'm from, and you try to grow it here in Florida, it might just not want to grow. And no matter how much fertilizer that you put on it, it is not going to want to go. This example in the picture is an Iorexa, and this is a landscape shrub that's commonly planted in Florida. So the picture on the left is when it's in alkaline soil with a high pH. And you can see the leaves are yellowing, and that's because it's not able to absorb the nutrients at that high pH. In the acidic soil where it has low pH, then it's doing fine and it's healthy and it's green. So that's not a fertilizer problem, that is a pH problem. So there we would tell you to do a soil test and get the pH of your soil and match it to the plants that you're planting. So there's this plant guide, and this is an excellent resource. You can scan the QR codes here. There's also the plant app, which is like the guide as an app. And you can look up to see what are some Florida-friendly plants, which include both native Florida plants and non-native plants. This book lists over 500 Florida-friendly plants and also has some landscape design tips, and it goes over the 9 Florida-friendly landscaping principles. So be sure to get these this book or download the app, and it's a very valuable resource that I refer to all the time. And so this is just a detailed picture of what you can see in the book or on the app. So for example, it will tell you a plant, like this star anise here with the example. So this shows you what zone it grows in, whether it's north or central or south. It tells you whether it's a native plant. It will say yes or no if it's native to Florida or not. It will give you the size at maturity, because you don't want to have to be trimming something all the time. You don't want to plant a huge tree right next to your house. It will also tell you the soil pH range that it prefers, and the soil texture, and how the drainage is, and also the drought tolerance. It has a high tolerance to drought or a low tolerance to drought, and also what kind of wildlife it attracts. It has the icon for the butterfly or the bee or the bird. So this is a great resource, and you can look all this information on all these plants up in the book or online in the plant app. So just another note about like the plants and the fertilizer. So a lot of people are planting turf grass under a huge oak tree, and they just can't get it to grow, and then they fertilize it, and that doesn't really help either. So there are different turf grasses that have different tolerances to shade. So the least tolerant is St. Augustine grass, and then the Bahia grass and the Bermuda grass are more tolerant to shade. And if it's just too shady for turf grass at all, then consider some of those alternative lawns like the Liriope or a perennial peanut or something. And so now for our next poll. So we're going to do the pop-up window for the Zoom poll here, and you can fill that in once we get the pop-up. So the question is, proper fertilizer use can allow any plant to grow. I think it should have a W, in any environment. The question again, proper fertilizer can use any plant to grow in any environment. Is that true or is that false? Please answer the question in the pop-up, and hopefully some of you guys figured out how to get that to work here. We'll give you about 30 seconds to answer the Zoom poll. Okay, last chance to answer the Zoom poll. Go ahead and fill in your answer. Okay, thank you. And now I am going to turn it back over to Tina McIntyre to discuss lawn and landscape with you. Take it away, Tina.
Thanks, Tia. Those are all really great best management practices and tips for everybody to integrate. So on that vein, we're going to continue learning a little bit more as it relates to the lawn and landscape. So water is actually really important for our plants, obviously, as it is for every living thing. And so we really want to focus on watering efficiently, principle number 2. And when we think of water, we want to think about the rain providing us the first step to what our plants need. After the rain, we're using the irrigation as a supplement during those droughty periods or long hot days that get our plants through to the next rain event. And so when we change our mind to think of it that way, that's really important, because we're going to come from a conservation mindset, come from a water quality, water quantity mindset, and really also the best mindset for our plants, for our lawn and landscape. Because if we're not paying attention to the rain and overwatering or underwatering, we're going to have lots of issues. And that can include, fertilizer burn. So if you're doing fertilization, you can have fertilizer burn under dry conditions. So if it's too little water, excessive irrigation can leach those nutrients out of the soil. As it relates to fertilizer, we want to look for signs of drought. So any kind of wilting or drooping or, shriveling of the turf grass, a curling of the leaves, that's really going to indicate dry plants. And that's when we need to access that water and that irrigation. watering efficiently according to those plant needs. So that's thinking about if that plant is a drought tolerant species, then we can group it with other drought tolerant species where we want to have our vegetable gardens or our other areas on different zones. And so we're able to calibrate those accordingly. And they must be serviced regularly. So things like this, we're irrigating the pavement. This is creating now a slip hazard. We definitely want to be adjusting these because things happen, right? The world is just active out there. And so people might be accidentally walking and, kick a sprinkler head or drive over one. Different things, little critters get into places and they might mess with dials or mess with rotors and things clog up. So we need to be actively checking our irrigation at least twice a year, if not more. The more the better. And that's going to be delivering water to our plants. We see a lot of issues that come into the extension office are really tied to water. And so either the donut, there's no donut around the irrigation, it gets buried, and things like that. So really thinking about ways that we can improve our irrigation. And we have consequences if we choose to ignore this aspect of our lawn and landscape. So the roots can become compromised. If we're overwatering, we're watering too much, we get a rotted environment. And again, we have our rainy season coming up. We're in May. And so we're going to start getting our summer rains. We really want to be sure to recalibrate these systems so we're not creating a rotting environment in that root zone. Pest problems can increase. So once the plant starts to decline, if they have a root zone that's compromised, we're going to see pests start to gravitate towards those plants. So different diseases or funguses or insects are going to actually move towards that plant and make it worse. If we're over fertilizing or we're over irrigating, we can have an increase of thatch. So thatch is this brown stuff pictured here in the turf, and that's a natural process, a natural part of the turf grass growing. It's just like if a piece of corn, a corn plant was growing, one leaf would go up and then it would go down, it would brown and dry. Natural part of the plant. But when we're irrigating so much and we're fertilizing so much, the plant is growing more rapidly. We're creating that thatch much more rapidly. And then we have an increase of thatch, which then can cause areas for pests and disease or, really shade and choke out the turf grass. So we also want to think about irrigating and challenging our plants to become drought tolerant. So as species, certain species are drought tolerant, but at the same token, individual plants can be challenged to become more drought tolerant. So it's like if we have a plant in a nursery and it's getting misted 10 times a day, it's going to come to expect that misting 10 times a day. But if we have our turf grass or our landscape plants in our gardens and our yards, and we're expecting them to be drought tolerant and to survive off the rain, and then we'll step in, and mother the plants as they're, needing it, then it's going to be much more likely to survive those droughty days. And if we're overwatering, we're going to see an increase in dollarweed, an increase of weeds. So I've seen when I'm walking around the neighborhood, you see one house right next to another, same conditions, same, turf grass. One has an infestation of dollarweed, the other one has none. And you have to wonder what the irrigation regimen is at the one house with the dollarweed, because they have to be over irrigating, as very, very likely. And now we're going to turn to another quick poll, and thank you so much for participating in these. So let me just launch this. It is, what non-pesticide practice can reduce plant disease and pests? So first option, and you should be seeing the poll now. First option, right plant, right place. Second option, proper irrigation. Third option, both A and B, right plant, right place, and proper irrigation. Or D, neither, pesticides are always needed. So go ahead and make your selection. We do have almost 180 people on here, so we can all poll at the same time. It's not one at a time, so just go ahead and make your selection, and we'll close it out in just another few seconds. Remember to put your questions in the question and answer section, because we do not, we might miss your question in the chat box because it does go quite quickly. And with that, we're going to close the poll. Thank you for participating in that. Most of you got it. It was A and B. So the right plant in the right place and proper irrigation. Tia talked a lot about right plant, right place, and I just covered irrigation. So again, here's an example. We can get nutsedge, we can get dollar weed when we are overwatering. So if you see a yard with these weeds, you know, think about, well, how much is it raining in this location? Is it a low-lying area? And then if we're irrigating on top of that, then, you know, this is going to be causing the issues. Now, I have a lot of people ask me, well, how long should I run the irrigation? How much water should I apply? Well, again, it's relative to the rain. So we want to start with a rain gauge, or there's a lot of fantastic apps that we can download to get exact rainfall data for GPS locations. So check those out in the App Store or Google Play or whatever you use. And then we want to think about, if we do need to irrigate, we're doing 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch per application. So it's not necessarily a duration of time. It's the amount that's actually coming out of the system. And this varies because every single system is different. So some of them have rotors or pop-up sprayers or micro irrigation, misters, drip, and each system has a different pressure. Each different has this different size PVC. So that's going to create a lot of variability in the system and the amount of water that's actually coming out. And so we want to make sure that we're using the catch can method, putting out the little cat cans or tuna cans into our landscape, turning the irrigation on for 15 minutes, seeing how much water is actually applied in that can and measuring it out. We also want to be following any restrictions in our area. So in the St. Johns River Water Management District, which does cover Seminole, Orange, and Volusia counties all the way up through Jacksonville, we are allowed to water during this portion of the year twice a week. However, we do want to, again, not always default to that. We want to make sure that if we need to, we are using it. And so it's been quite more wet than usual springtime. And so, you know, the plants are doing pretty good as relative to the last few years. And so, you know, but these are the restrictions. And so check your local municipality. I know within Seminole County, winter, spring, sometimes we'll activate different conservation methods, and other counties and cities around the state do. So just keep up with the conservation, water conservation news in your local area. And then just a quick note about those cooler months. In Central Florida and North Florida, we go dormant. Things drop their leaves. I know when people think of Florida, they think tropical and, you know, palm trees and everything like that. But we have a lot of plants that go dormant, including our turf grass. We don't want to be fertilizing or irrigating intensely during those months, or even at all. And so we can water every 2 weeks during the cooler months during our winter, which is December through February, give or take. So I mentioned the catch can method. We put these little cans around the yard, we turn on the system for 15 minutes, and then we use our ruler to actually assess how much water is in that can. And what we're looking for is that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. So just another poll here to make sure everybody is awake and not snoozing, and that you are participating and enjoying our lively webinar here today. How long should you run an irrigation system for? 30 minutes. Time varies with each system. Run long enough to deliver 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of water. Check your local management district. At least an hour in each zone. Okay. You guys are getting good at this now. We've had almost 145 people respond to the poll already. So great job in honing in your Zoom skills today. Okay, and last chance, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Thank you all for participating. And it was, the time varies. So each system depends on what's going on in that system. And we are looking for 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. Great. So taking a quick look at irrigation systems, and again, irrigation is really important as it relates to fertilizer. And that's because when we use a slow release product, it's slowly released every time that it interfaces with water. And so if we're, watching the rain and, using our irrigation properly, our plants are going to be able to access those nutrients much more beneficially than if that's not something we're necessarily paying attention to. So the types of systems we have are pop-up sprayers, which are pretty much, hidden, and then they pop right out of the soil. And those are ones that you really want to have a donut around, because you might not know it's even there. So those little gray brick donuts are really important. We have our rotors, again, also important because they actually stick out of the ground. And so it lets people know, like, hey, don't have anything run over this irrigation. And then micro irrigation. So a quick look at micro irrigation. It's great for landscape plants. It's not necessarily ideal for a turf grass, but for those landscapes or shrubs, trees, veggie gardens, herb gardens, all those little nice enclaves by the front of the HOA sign, this is what we want to be using. And the lucky thing for us is this is really user friendly. And so we can easily set it up, pop it together, create spray heads where we want them. It's 10 times more efficient than regular irrigation because it delivers the irrigation right at that root zone, at the mulch zone. And so we're not getting a lot of excess foliar spray where we're, watering the leaves. We're getting less runoff, using less water. So it's just really a Florida friendly thing to be using micro irrigation. And again, super easy to install. So we can just, pop it in and, it just punch those little holes. And this also includes drip irrigation. We also want to make sure that we have a functioning rain shutoff device. This is really important and actually required by state law. It has to be a functioning rain shutoff device for all functioning irrigation systems in the state of Florida, residential, commercial, everything. So this can actually shut off the system if it's wet outside, if it's raining. So, I know everybody's lamented and complained about the rain falling and the irrigations running. Those systems might still go off if it's just a tiny drizzle, because Florida clouds really have an interesting way of moving, right? It might rain on one street and not the other. So those systems might be calibrated based on the amount of water falling. But if it's sufficient, then, it might actually turn it off. And that's really important for water conservation. Then we also have managing yard pests responsibly. So I mentioned this is one of Florida Friendly's 9 principles, number 6. And this is how we think of our lawn and landscape. And so we want to start off with those cultural practices that are beneficial to the site. So when we're pruning or when we're considering plants to plant, the right plant, right place, we're sanitizing our tools, we're rotating, crops if we're doing different things like veggie gardens or other things like that. We're doing cultural practices, our pruning, the way that we weed whack, and we don't weed whack right up to a tree and damage the bark. All those little things add up in the landscape, and so that we're not causing damage over time or immediately, right? So an example of like crepe myrtle. So if we're constantly pruning our crepe myrtles at, what we call crepe murder, where we're just basically chainsawing them, it's going to basically shorten the life of the tree. And so we want to be doing proper pruning to avoid, losing trees or, turf grass, things like that. And then we want to think about the physical and the mechanical. So if we have insects, we want to use sticky traps or other things that might, keep them out or keep them in. And then move to biological. So biological pest control. So things like BT, if we have outbreaks, like it's actually a biological bacteria that we're using to control those caterpillars, or other types of biological control. For example, we have air potato and the air potato beetle, where those air potato beetles actually eat the vegetation of the air potato. So it's a great use of nature itself, right? We're using the ecosystem dynamic for our benefit. And then we want to elevate to chemical controls. After we've tried all these other things, we've done our prevention, we want to elevate to chemical controls, with our first choice being those biorational controls. So soaps, horticultural oils, or other types of maybe beneficial microbes, like compost and enhancing our soils. Things like that. And then finally moving to those synthetic chemicals that kill on contact. We don't want to be searching for a routine pesticide application where we're just spraying for the sake of spraying, weekly or monthly, because we want to identify the insects. We want to know what we're spraying and if it needs treatment at all. A lot of the insects actually most of the insects that we interface with are benign or beneficial. And so only a small percentage are actually harmful and are going to harm our plants. And that's why we want to make sure that we're not just killing everything out there. And again, as we move up the triangle, we're moving up in intervention, and we're also moving up in toxicity. So we're going to be, killing any of those monarch larvae. We're going to be killing other things as we, use those synthetic chemicals. Principle number 4, we have mulch. And so mulch is going to help to reduce erosion, which is, again, twofold. Tia had mentioned that sometimes erosion can not only lead to turbidity in our water systems, but also create issues with the amount of phosphorus. So if we have erosion that has high amounts of phosphorus in it, then we're going to also see not only turbidity, but that phosphorus entering our waterways. So and it makes its way there. You might think, well, I'm not too, close to a water body, but eventually that sediment does make its way downstream. So mulch can help to prevent that. It holds the moisture in the root zone, and so it makes our irrigation more effective, or rainfall more effective. It reduces weeds, and we really want to do about 2 to 3 inches to suppress that weed activity. And when we're applying it, we want to allow for circulation and make sure that we're not mulching right up to the tree or the shrub or the plant to kind of cause girdling or issues with our tree and shrubs. So looking specifically at our turf grass, there's two that are top 2 stressors for our turf. That's a tongue twister. We're improper water amounts, and so we're applying either more or less than that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. The root systems are compromised and things like that, or we're mowing too short. And we've seen this, right? The landscaper comes, or dad doesn't know what he's doing, or mom gets out there and the deck is just too low. So there's desired height for every single species of turf grass, and our turf grass science has researched that to show what is beneficial for each one. When we drop that mower blade deck all the way down and we scalp the grass, we're stressing out our turf, and so we don't want to be doing that. So for example, St. Augustine likes it at about 3.5 to 4 inches, zoysia about 1.5 to 2.5 inches, Bahia grass is about 3 to 4 inches. And so check your mower blade deck or your mower deck to make sure that, you can adjust that accordingly so you're not hurting the turf. Mow at the highest recommended level. Don't remove more than 1/3 of the leaf blade at a time. Leave those grass clippings on the ground, and that's going to help to restore the turf. It's going to help to provide nutrients and organic material to the turf grass. Don't mow when it's wet. Keep mower blades sharp, and use mulching blades if you have them. And remember, keep those grass clippings on the lawn and not on our paved surfaces. So the average home generates about 400 pounds of grass clippings in 1 year. Grass clippings decompose into nitrogen and phosphorus, so we never want to leave them on paved surfaces or blow them down a storm drain. That's actually illegal here in Seminole County and prohibited in many other areas. And so definitely sweeping them up, using them in compost is a great solution. And now I'm going to turn it over to our fertilizer educator, Tom Satcher, to talk about fertilizer fundamentals.
Thank you so much, Tina. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so very much for joining our webinar today. This is the fun part, at least for me. This section is going to discuss fertilizer fundamentals. And in keeping with Orange and Seminole County's fertilizer ordinances, we're going to touch base on some of those issues as well. And I am looking for Tina. I cannot find my cursor. Thank you so much. I see it now. Okay, so let's start with plant nutrients. Our plants get nutrients, first of all, from the environment, and all of these things, most of these things are needed by all of our plants, and some of our plants need all of them. But from our environment, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are three of the nutrients that I think literally all of our plants need. And then we move into macronutrients, and there are 6 of them listed here. The 3 most common ones, and the ones you're going to see on all the fertilizer bags, are the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the symbols there are NPK. We'll get into that a little bit more. But there are several others that are also macronutrients, and those are calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Many plants need some or all of those macronutrients as well. And then we get into some of the micronutrients, which are going to be smaller amounts of nutrients that plants need in different quantities, depending on the plant. We have iron and manganese, boron, copper, molybdenum. I've been practicing to say that, and zinc. So you'll see a lot of these ingredients when you start looking at your fertilizer bags and look at the guaranteed analysis. And we're going to speak to that a little bit more as well in the next slide. Well, not in the next slide, but in coming slides. I mentioned the big 3, the 3 that you'll see on your fertilizer bags are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Each of them serves a different purpose for our plants. Nitrogen, as probably a lot of us know, that's how you green up your grass. You put nitrogen down, it promotes that plant growth and aids the chlorophyll, which gives the green color to our turf grass. Phosphorus is very important and it's needed in our turf grass as well. However, again, some of you may be aware, we actually mine and export phosphorus out of the state of Florida. We have so much of it in our soils. Central Florida is no exception there, and most often we're going to find that we have more than enough phosphorus in our soil and that we do not need to apply any additional phosphorus. And again, we're going to look at those numbers here in another slide or two. Potassium helps to strengthen the roots of the plants. It makes the plants stronger, more resistant to disease, and also provides some cold tolerance. So the 3 numbers on the fertilizer bags, you're looking at 1608. These numbers will always appear in the same order. Nitrogen is first, phosphorus is in the middle, and potassium is the 3rd number at the end. As you see, that middle number is 0. And you'll find more and more of your fertilizers these days, turf grass fertilizers, we should mention that. Turf grass and landscape fertilizers should be purchased with no phosphorus in them, unless there is that caveat we mentioned before. If there is a nutrient deficiency in your soil for phosphorus, you wanted to get that determined by a soil test. University of Florida provides an excellent soil sample test or soil test for your sample products, and will tell you exactly what you have in there in terms of whether or not you need additional phosphorus. It also will give you a pH reading and also tell you about other elements and nutrients that are in your soil so that you can best determine what grade and what blend of fertilizer you really need for your lawn. I mentioned soil testing. And I was just on the help desk this morning and somebody wanted to redo his whole lawn. And he was telling me about how much lime he was putting down. And he was telling me, well, you know, I'm from Oviedo and, you know, we used to go out there and it didn't matter. We just put lime down every year. Well, you do want to get your, before you make a hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars of investment, if you're going to resod a lawn, the first thing, the most advisable thing that we would recommend is get a $10 soil sample test from the University of Florida to see exactly what you might need and where you might be lacking. The test they do will determine pH. It was mentioned earlier, and it goes, bears repeating that if the pH is not proper, not in the right range for our soil, for the turf grass, for instance, the soils the nutrients cannot be taken up adequately by the plants, by the turf. And we want to have a good idea of what our pH is going into before we get started with the big process of resodding. Macronutrient levels are tested. You'll also find out whether or not you need any phosphorus in your lawn. And again, I have not seen a soil test yet in Central Florida that's come back stating that they were low in phosphorus. And this is so important because as was mentioned before, and we'll repeat it, nitrogen and phosphorus are the two largest nutrient contributors to pollution in our waterways. And we have a good deal of control over that by how much of the nitrogen that we put down, and hopefully not putting down any phosphorus unless it is needed. Manganese and magnesium are also measured, and this lab info will be sent after the webinar. This is an interesting chart. Soil pH, I just mentioned that. And there's an example off to the right here where turf grass, where you have a very low pH, where you might be somewhere in the middle, and then where the pH is high. You can see that this particular product, this particular plant is benefiting, in this case, very much from a higher pH and suffering from low pH. If you look at that chart on the left, this particular chart shows your pH going from 4.0 to 10. Most of the soils, at least the pH tests that I have seen, soils are coming in anywhere from maybe 5.5 to maybe 7.5. Seldom have I seen any much higher or lower than that. Now, the good news there is if you look right in the center of this chart, you'll see those lines going across where they're very narrow. For instance, nitrogen at 4.0 that line is very narrow. That means the plants in that 4.0 pH area are going to have a lot of difficulty taking up nitrogen. Likewise, if you move to the extreme right of that line for nitrogen at pH of 10, once again, the plants are going to struggle to get nitrogen. But the sweet spot in there, as you can see, is probably around from 6.0 to maybe 8 in terms of nitrogen. And the same process follows through. You can see phosphorus. Phosphorus acts very unusual. It's a more narrow range. But again, we have a good deal of it in our soil, so we seldom have to be concerned about putting it down. Potassium is very generous. It's difficult at 4.0 for the plants to pick it up, but beginning at 5 or 6, even up to 10, your plant would be able to take up the potassium that's in the soil. And likewise for those other measurements in there. So plant nutrition does have an effect on how resistant our plants are going to be to disease. All right, for nutrients, we have nitrogen. And if we have an excessive amount of quick release nitrogen, it could lead to brown patch in our turf. If there is a potassium deficiency, we get Pythium root rot, And if there's a manganese deficiency, we have something we've seen in here from time to time. It's take all root rot, and that is pretty much what it means. Basically takes your whole lawn out if you have a deficiency in manganese. And manganese is one of our micronutrients, but we need to know that we have some of it in our soil. Florida soils, I would say they're unique. They're certainly different from many parts of the United States. It was mentioned earlier, and I think the statistic lately is that we have anywhere from 900 to 1,000 people a day moving into this fine state of Florida. Many of them coming from other parts of the country. Many of them may be very good at gardening and just landscaping, but they need to understand the Florida soil is probably going to be different from other parts of the country. Our soil, as most of you know, is just basically pure sand, naturally, almost a pure sand with very little organic matter in it. You go up to places like Georgia, and I've got a sister-in-law living in Tennessee, and their soil is practically all clay. I mean, you can't put a shovel in that. You have to get out there with the tractor, or you're going to have a lot of hard work anyway, making a garden. So you need to know that. Because our soil here is very sandy, moisture drains out very quickly, whereas in other parts of the country, those soils will hold moisture for much longer periods. Back to Florida, because it's sandy and because the moisture drains out quickly, the nutrients will also leach out with all of that moisture very quickly, where some other parts of the country, their soil will hold nutrients as sometimes 10 times as long as the nutrients will be held here in Florida. The second slide shows quick release nitrogen does not last but for maybe a few days. And yet that same quick release nitrogen would be fine in some other parts of the country. It can stay in the soil for months. Florida, our phosphorus levels are high, as we've mentioned before, but other parts of the country, they may need to have phosphorus in their turf grass fertilizers. In Florida, potassium levels are low, but they may be very high elsewhere. So fertilizers, as it states at the bottom, fertilizers that work very well in other parts of the country may not be suitable for Florida. We want to know, based on what we've just discussed, what kind of fertilizers, what fertilizer blends are best for us here in Florida. Okay, and now we're going to launch a quick poll. This question is, which major nutrient, just blocked it out, I'm sorry. What happened here? Okay, you go back. I'm sorry, the poll popped up right
Okay,
in front of me.
Tom, I got it. Just give me a minute here. Okay, just
Okay.
don't move your mouse, please.
All right, you're going to bring me back? Okay.
Yep, we're gonna launch the poll. Just give it a minute. Okay, you should be seeing it now.
Okay, I'm sorry, there it is now. So which major nutrient is usually adequate in Florida soils? The first choice is nitrogen. The next choice is phosphorus. The third choice is potassium. And the last choice is none of the above. Let's give everyone 30 or 40 seconds to answer that. How's that response rate looking, Tina? Okay. All right, then we're on to the next slide. That poll has been completed. So we mentioned in the last few slides about quick release nitrogen. We're very concerned and want want to just explain how important slow release nitrogen is in our fertilizers. Both Seminole and Orange County's ordinance, now fertilizer ordinance, calls for a minimum of 65% slow release nitrogen. And it's slow release because look at this little picture off to the left. And it's slow release, by the way, is also called controlled release or water insoluble. It's almost like, I've heard it like in the sample example was like an M&M. It's got a hard shell on the outside with something softer on the inside. Urea, which is the most common nutrient used to provide nitrogen to the soil and the plants, in this case is coated with a harder cover. It can be covered, it's going to be a polymer coating or a sulfur coating, which locks in the urea, the nitrogen, over a period of time. It is released very slowly. It's a function of the temperature and the moisture in the soil as to how quickly it releases, but most slow release nitrogen products will tell you that it should last 3 or 4 months. Some will last as long as 6 months. And the best part of this, of course, if it's slow release and it's in the soil, then when we get our next rainfall, heavy rainfall, it's not going to leach through the soil and wind up in our waterways. Okay, Tina, I'm lacking that arrow. Where is it? Okay, I've got it. All right, you got it. Thank you. So the benefits of slow release, it will last through the summer. Now, this is key because, as we've discussed earlier, there is a restricted period in our counties from June 1 through September 30. And the ordinance calls for no nitrogen and, of course, no phosphorus any time of the year unless it's needed, but no phosphorus or nitrogen is to be applied between June 1 and September 30. So what do we do in the summertime? Well, we don't put that fertilizer down. But if we've put down slow release during the springtime, then that slow release nitrogen should carry our lawn right up through the restricted period and into the early part of October, when we can, once we're outside the restricted period, we can fertilize once again if needed. So again, other benefits of slow release is it's an efficient use of nitrogens. It means we put down less and more of it stays in the soil and less of it winds up in our waterways, in our lakes. Okay, the fertilizer label. This tells the story, folks, and some people wonder, what are all those numbers on the bag and how do I interpret that label on the back? Well, we talked about it before. The numbers are always the same. Nitrogen is 14% in this particular example. Phosphorus is 0 and potassium is at 26%. All right, is at 26. Those numbers do correspond to the percentage of fertilizer in that bag. So this bag, if it were a 100-pound bag, just to make the math easy, if that was a 100-pound bag of fertilizer, you'd have 14 pounds of nitrogen and 26 pounds of potassium. Obviously, the bags we buy in the store is going to be less than that, but that is the percentage of the product in that bag. If we look at the label, and worst part about this, folks, is these fertilizer bags have all of them have the label on the back of the bag, which means flipping it over if you want to see the label. But the guaranteed analysis is going to tell us in the very first line up there, it says total nitrogen 14%. It goes on to say potash is another word for potassium, and it tells you there's 26% of that. And then it goes on to tell you about some of the other macro and micronutrients. There's 19% of sulfur in this particular product, less than 1% of iron. There's some manganese, And that's pretty much it for the nutrients in this bag. You read down a little bit further and it says derived from polymer coated sulfur, coated urea, and then sulfur of potash, iron oxide, manganese oxide. And there's a little bit of chlorine as well. So at the very bottom, you'll see it says 9.10% of slowly available urea nitrogen that comes from polymer coated and sulfur coated urea. Why don't we, if any of you have your cell phones handy or your computers handy, this will take about 15 or 20 seconds. But if you have your computer open, the simplest way to do this is you plug in 14, which is your top number, hit your divisor, and then plug in 9.10. And that should come out to 0.65. And of course, the math you see up there at the top says the same thing. You take 9.1, the divisor is 14, and you multiply it by 100, and that will give you 65%. So this bag is compliant with our ordinance in both Orange and Seminole County. It contains 65% slow release nitrogen. You're going to find a lot of fertilizers on the market today that are still the same example. If you saw this, it would say 14% total nitrogen, and at the bottom it might say 7% solely available nitrogen. Well, 7 divided by 14 is going to give you 50%. So you're going to find a lot of 50% slow release nitrogen out there in the fertilizer bags. What you want to look for in our counties, at least, is this higher ratio to get you to 65% or more slow release nitrogen. We mentioned before that plants need phosphorus, but we also said in most cases, Florida has more than we need, and it shouldn't be applied unless, as it states there, if you get a soil test that shows you have a deficiency in phosphorus. And again, another good reason to get this soil test, this UF soil test, it will tell you what is in your soil, and you only have to do those soil tests maybe once every couple or 3 years by UF recommendations. You'll have a good idea of what's in your soil. Oh, I love this slide. Fertilizer timing. Do not apply fertilizer when rain is forecasted. This is now part of the ordinance, and particularly fertilizing is prohibited under flood or tropical storm, hurricane watch warnings, or, and this might seem to make sense just on the face of it, but prohibited when soils are saturated. What's going to happen if you put fertilizer down there with the soil saturated is it's going to probably float off the top, and if you get even a little bit of rain, it's going to wash off. I got to tell you, in my younger years, I used to time the application of my fertilizer by the storm clouds coming in, because I didn't have an irrigation system. I didn't want to have to go out there with a hose afterward, and I knew it needed to be watered in. So I said, here they come, here come those rain clouds, and I rush out there and load up my fertilizer and get my spreader and put it down just in time for the rain to wash it in. I've learned since then that is probably not the best thing to do. Now, if we get a gentle rain, I dodged a bullet. But if I get one of those typical rains that we get in the summertime, folks, you know, we might get an inch of rain in a half an hour. We might get an inch of rain in 45 minutes, or 2 inches of rain in 45 minutes or an hour. And if we get that much rain right after putting the fertilizer down, a fair amount of it is going to wash off, run off the top of your soil, and a good deal of the rest of it is going to be driven through your soil and will leach through the soil and again into our waterways. So this is, you know, and it doesn't state it here, but one of the statistics I've come across is that Florida gets, and we get a lot of rain, maybe 55, 60%, 55, 60 inches of rain a year. We get a full 2/3 of our rain during the 4-month period of June, July, August, and September. So 2/3 of all of our rain come down during that restricted period. That is our rainy period. That's when we get a hellacious amount of rain. And that is causing, in that period of time, if we're putting down quick release nitrogen, or we're putting down phosphorus, that is when most of that's going to wind up in our lakes and rivers and streams. So we say if you must fertilize twice a year, no more. Some people in the habit, they feel like they need to put something down every 60 days, but the one time there's no question that we should fertilize is around in April. You can get into May, but April, and then, which is before the restricted period. And again, if the lawn is looking a little stressed in October, a second dose of fertilizer is fine. Again, recommending 65% or more to keep within the ordinance. And this, again, the chart just shows you where our growth is coming from. If we have a good base of slow release nitrogen in our soil in the springtime, then it'll carry us right through the summer and into the fall around October, when if it starts getting stressed, then a second application of fertilizer would certainly be in order. So you see the warm season grass is just growing in the summer because, you know, quite frankly, because of all that rain, but hopefully because we have some good slow release nitrogen in there as well. So how do you choose the right formula? Well, this very first one is high in nitrogen. That's okay. It's got no potassium. That's okay. But it's extremely low in potassium. So you're going to get a lot of greening initially, but if the plants need potassium, you know, for root strength and just good basic health, it's not in that fertilizer. The second one is awful for for us in Central Florida. It's got 18% of its nitrogen. That's fine, but 24% is phosphorus. Now, this fertilizer may be excellent in some other states where they're very low in phosphorus. This is poison to us in Central Florida for all the reasons we talked about before. So a good rule of thumb here. So you have nitrogen, and you can have 16. This last one is 1608. That's a good fertilizer. If you had 29 and 0 up top, you would want at least 15% of potassium in there. So again, the ratio there is you're looking at nitrogen is twice the level of the amount of potassium, or if you say it the other way around, the potassium, which is at the end there, should be at least half of your nitrogen level. Now keep in mind, you say that's an awful lot of nitrogen at 29%, but when you read the labels are going to tell you how much to put down. So you're going to find that the labels are designed for you to apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So I dare say the instructions for that very first one, if you were using it, would tell you to put down roughly half as much as you would be putting down if you were using 1608. How much fertilizer should we use? This is recommended. Again, this is the, at any given time, a maximum of 1 pound per 1,000 square feet should be applied. You put down more than that, and you may be, again, just risking losing some of it through leaching. And the plants, our turf grasses, usually fare very well with 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. And since that is the recommended application, then in your St. Augustine, you would put down, if you had 2 applications, you'd be putting down 2 pounds a year. So as your grass is pretty much the same, but here is a little more resilient and doesn't need but 1 pound of nitrogen per year. Okay, we have another quick poll coming up now, and the question is, when choosing the right fertilizer, the nitrogen to potassium ratio should be, first answer A, was it 2-to-1, or B, is it 1-to-10, or C, is it 5-to-1 ratio? That should be popping up momentarily. There it is.
Okay, there you should see it now.
Again, so when choosing the right turf grass fertilizer, nitrogen to potassium ratio should be 2-to-1, or 1-to-10, or 5-to-1. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. Again, thank you for your time and bearing with me today. And we turn it back now, I believe, back to Tina.
Okay,
No,
we
no,
are
I'm sorry, Jacques.
closing the poll.
Jacques.
Hi.
Okay, take it away, Jacques.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom, Tia, Tina. Thank you all. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Jacques Worley. I am the Strategic Engagement Coordinator with Orange County's Environmental Protection Division. So as I pick up where our previous speakers left off, to remember about the importance of water, right? So we talked earlier about the fact that we're in a watershed. If you've been in Florida, been flying in, you see all the water bodies that we have around us. And it's also to keep in mind, following up after what Tom has been talking about with fertilizer, is just to be sure that you are applying at least a 1/4 inch of water after you have put down fertilizer. So, like he said, don't do as he did way back when in putting fertilizer before a predicted storm, but just putting out a little bit of water, at least a 1/4 inch, to be sure that the fertilizer is activated and gets moving. So secondly, you'll always keep in mind about the use of a deflector shield. Fertilizer is expensive, and deflector shield help us make sure that the fertilizer ends up where we want it to go, which is in our lawn and in our landscapes, right? It protects the waterways, so near our water bodies, near our sidewalk, to be sure that it's not entering our stormwater system. And speaking of keeping fertilizer where it belongs, both Seminole and Orange County recommends a maintenance zone next to any type of waterfront that you may have. For Seminole County, there's a restriction of at least keep fertilizer within 15 feet away from a water body. And then in Orange County, it's 25 feet away from a water body. Tom talked a little bit about the macronutrients and the micronutrients that we can find in fertilizer. And in the summertime, though we do have a restricted period from June 1st to September 30th, there are some fertilizers that can be used if needed in the summer. And first and foremost, those fertilizers need to be nitrogen and phosphorus free. But they should always be based on a soil test. I think, as Tom talked about, it just costs about $10. A pH test costs about $2. And getting a proper profile on your soil and on your landscape is the best indicator on what type of fertilizer that you should be getting. So from there, micronutrient and summer blends will have other things besides nitrogen and phosphorus, other important macro and micronutrients. They'll have iron, which is great at enhancing color. Manganese for disease resistance. And, you know, we talked about potassium, about its overall plant health and benefits. Lime corrects acidic soils, and compost, especially backyard compost, when that stuff breaks down, can always be used. Though it says, you know, use at any time, I always like to add, you know, again, about the water component. Be sure that we are not fertilizing or applying anything 24 hours at least prior to a predicted rain event. All right, let's start this here. So we have another cool little PSA for you all. Keep things moving nice and funny along.
Summer is here. Fertilize the right way this time of year. When you're out looking for a fertilizer, you should only get a summer blend. Oh, we're spreading in the sunlight, and summer blends will feed your lawn just right.
Seminole County government and its partners want to remind you to fertilize responsibly. Check out the facts at fertilizeflorida.com.
Awesome. I love those PSAs, always fun. So keep in mind, right, if you do need to fertilize during the restricted period, that if you do get your soil tested, it'll be a great way to tell you what nutrients you need. And if you're avoiding nitrogen and phosphorus base fertilizers in the summertime, you're doing our water bodies a lot of good. So throughout this presentation, you know, we've talked about the watershed, the importance of watershed. We've talked about landscaping BMPs. And for the rest of this portion, we'll just dive a little bit on ordinances and getting into some details of those ordinances. So both Seminole and Orange County, we both have ordinances. And I know some of you all are joining us from other places in the state and some even out of state. But each of you all have some ordinances in your specific municipality. A lot of these ordinances came up and were created strictly with the mindset of protecting our water bodies, which is a big gem and a resource for all of us here that are living in Florida. So I'll start diving a little bit in on the ordinance details. But before we do, we have a question for you all here. Okay, so before we join this webinar, were you aware that your county or your municipality had an ordinance? Yes or no? We'll do a nice little 30 seconds for that one, 36 seconds for that one. Tina, you're more than welcome to close that when the time comes. So again, prior to this webinar, were you aware of the fertilizer ordinance in your county? All right, I believe we're good. So we'll move on to the next slide. All right. So for us here that are in Central Florida and Orange County and Seminole County specifically, though we each have our own specific ordinance, there's a lot of similarities between them, right? So throughout the year, especially in the summer, no phosphorus unless a soil test shows that it is needed. That's one. Always observe the restricted periods from June 1st to September 30th. So that is both for Seminole and Orange counties. And most of our neighboring counties also have that restricted period of June 1st to September 30th that corresponds with our heavy rainy seasons. Orange County and Seminole County, we have a minimum of 65% slow release nitrogen. There's some fertilizers out there that have up to 80% slow release nitrogen that I've seen. So, but at least a minimum of 65% slow release nitrogen when you are applying outside of the restricted period. Both of us have a restriction on the proximity to a waterway. For Orange County, it's 25 feet away from a waterway or water body. And for Seminole County, that's 15 feet. Always keep the grass clippings and keep the fertilizer on the lawn. So we each have restrictions on our ordinance and requirements specific to fertilizer and grass clipping. So that is something we often hear from residents, and a lot of the complaints that we often get will come from vegetative debris and grass clippings. And again, if those things end up in our waterway, like we mentioned earlier, they also have nutrients, they decompose and end up polluting our waterways. Each of us have our ordinance also apply to institutional applicators, and I'll get a little deeper in that in the coming slides. And then no fertilizer application prior to seeding or sodding. So no fertilizer at all prior to those steps. All right, so institutional applicators. So this one is quite lengthy, as you'll see here, but institutional applicators are anyone that applies fertilizer for the purpose of turf and landscape maintenance, but that are not like a private resident or a commercial applicator. So you're thinking about owners, employees of public lands, churches, schools, cemeteries, any place that HOAs, condos, any place that potentially have an employee apply fertilizer, then that's considered as a institutional fertilizer applicator. In both Orange and Seminole County, all commercial and institutional fertilizer applicators are required to abide by the Florida-friendly best management practices for the protection of water resources by the green industries. So that's commonly known as the GIBMP. So institutional applicators are required to take the GIBMP if you are working in Orange and in Seminole counties. With commercial applicators, earlier we talked about so with this most recent update that we did with our ordinance in Orange County, we've included a 3 pound of nitrogen per year per 1,000 square feet maximum. So no more than 3 pounds can be applied in total that year. And Tom had shown you all previously the recommended amount for some of the common grass types that you see here in Florida, and that's also shown here as well. So Seminole County does not have a maximum, but they go by the recommended pieces here, so that you see on the right here on the Central Florida section. So if you are applying twice, like it says, twice is nice, you end up covering all of these most common grass species here in Central Florida. I'm not sure if you all are able to see the top of this. Sorry about that.
No, it's cut off a little bit.
Okay. But there are some pieces where the ordinance provides exemptions. For example, when it comes to edible crops, so like farms, vegetable gardens, fruit trees, as long as they are within that 25 or 15 feet boundary, then they are exempt, as well as recreational and athletic turf. So If you are fertilizing a orange tree, a mango, or avocado, as long as that's within the 25 feet or 15 feet away from a water body, those specific type of fertilizers are exempt for your vegetable garden and so on. All right, we have another question here for you all. So which of the following are in both of the county ordinances? Is it A, use 65% or more slow release nitrogen in spring or fall? B, do not fertilize with nitrogen or phosphorus from June 1st to September 30th. C, you can use phosphorus without a soil test. And D, both A and B. All right, I think we're about good to go. Next, thank you. So correct, both A and B. So both our ordinances, just to keep in mind, we have 65% or more slow release nitrogen requirement in the spring or the fall. And always remember to not fertilize with nitrogen or phosphorus from June 1st to September 30th. All right, so some specific details on Orange County's ordinance. As I mentioned, it was just recently updated back in February of 2022. It's the third time, I guess, we are presenting an ordinance. Our first fertilizer ordinance was in 2010. And then in 2017, it was updated to be more stringent. And then in 2022, it was updated again after we had scientific research and all to back up for more protection. So it applies throughout Orange County to all of our cities, towns, and our unincorporated areas. It impacts businesses and applicators. So retail establishment stores, for example, that are selling fertilizer, or though they are not required, we cannot require them to ban the sale of fertilizer. We cannot ban the sale of fertilizer, but we've worked with our retail establishments to have educational posters out where fertilizer is being sold on every store. So that's one component that we have here in our ordinance in Orange County. And this recent update also has a requirement for golf courses to take the golf courses best management practice, which is also a training taught by UF-IFAS, if they want to be exempted from some of the requirements that we have in our ordinance. And then, commercial, institutional, and residential applicators. So this decal here is required by commercial applicators. And once they take the GIBMP and they have their FDAC licensing, they can send an email to fertilizer@ocfl.net, and someone will start communicating with them and organize for them to have the requested number of decals. And always go to our website, which is down here and can also be scanned here as well. ocfl.net/fertilize responsibly, where we have the retail establishment posters, we have decal and a lot more information there as well. So to summarize, no nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers between June 1st and September 30th. No nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers before and 30 days after seeding and sodding. No more than 3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. And no fertilizer within 25 feet of a water body or waterway. Institutional applicators must complete the GIBMP training class. And as I mentioned before, golf courses are required to take the golf course best management practice certification in order to be exempted from some portions of our ordinance. And that being said, that wraps up the portion for Orange County. I will now pass it on to Tina to pick up with the Seminole County's fertilizer ordinance.
Thank you, Jacques. Yeah, so for the Seminole County Fertilizer Ordinance, it does apply to all unincorporated areas of Seminole County, along with all of our cities. So Sanford, Altamont Springs, Castleberry, Lake Mary, Longwood, and Oviedo have all adopted the same exact ordinance. The exception is the city of Winter Springs that has the state model ordinance. And you can find more at fertilizeflorida.com. We also had a question about know your lawn care professional. So you are responsible as the landowner to, be responsible for all activities occurring on your property. So we've created this lawn care professional checklist, which you can get at fertilizeflorida.com, or it'll be included in the slides when we follow up. These are good questions to ask to make sure that your professional is certified, licensed, and doing all the best management practices that we've outlined in this webinar today. So definitely check that resource out. And we all want to do our part on protecting our waterways. So what happens in our yards, in our communities, in our landscapes, ends up in our water, and we want to fertilize wise for healthy grass and clean waterways. We have additional resources posted here. So we each have our individual websites, but we've also created a joint website, temporary website for all of the information. So there's links to the web pages, there's contact information, links to our social media, links to Florida Friendly newsletter signups, and more. You can QR code directly to this URL here, or link to it later when we send information. It also includes Volusia County's information on that page, because we've previously partnered with them to offer similar education. So their information is there as well. And you have just about made it to the 4 o'clock portion of our webinar. I just wanted to remind you that to receive the CEUs or the free fertilizer for Seminole County residents, you did need to have stayed the full 2 hours and complete the survey, which I'll be emailing to you here soon. It's going to come from a Q email at noreplyserver.com, which is from our Qualtrics program. It is safe. You can click it and fill out the survey. It also should be mobile friendly, so you'll be able to do it from your mobile device. So finish that as soon as possible. The quicker that you do your survey, the quicker that we can get you the CEUs and fertilizer bags. And even if you're not a lucky recipient of any of those things, we do ask that you complete the survey. So again, if you've received the fertilizer, you can do the survey, but we're not going to be able to provide you an additional bag of fertilizer. So just keep that in mind. And thank you so much. I know we have a lot of questions that we've covered in the question and answer section. Thank you to all of you that have engaged and done polls and asked questions and gave that shout out in the chat. Just going to review a few of the highlights before we close out here. So some of the questions and answers that I saw that were interesting was about the 25-foot. So that is for Orange County. There's a 25-foot requirement. That's no fertilizing within 25 feet of any water body, culvert, ditch, anything stormwater drain that connects to our waterways. So keeping that in mind, it does not apply to the drip line. I saw somebody was asking if it applies to the drip line of our trees. No, that the 25 feet is the recommended and the required for our water bodies. So we did cover lots of information about CEUs, and so we'll be following up with emails and links. And so it is important to effectively and appropriately fertilize during, even if you're not close to our waterways. So the question is how to best effectively fertilize when living on a water body that is impaired. And so for that, we really need to be careful with impaired water bodies that are already having fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus going in. And so if you have an impaired stormwater pond or a lake that you're on, you want to be really delicate and make sure you're following all the best management practices that we covered today. And really getting your community involved so people aren't over fertilizing and contributing additional nutrients. Let's see what other highlights of questions, and Tia, feel free to hop in if you had any questions that stood out in your mind. Here's a question: would sand be considered Florida friendly? Play sand, for example, instead of mulch? No. So Florida soils are typically already sandy. We don't want to be adding any additional sand unless you need to manage the fill or the property in that way. And so just being cognizant of keeping play sand or recreational sand in specific areas that are for that reason.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just wanted to reiterate some of the resources that are available online. You can go to the Florida Friendly website, and there we have the plant app, we have the fertilizer app, and these ordinances are always changing. So contact your local extension office or, the government in your area and make sure you're up to date with the ordinance. And then I did see somebody was like, well, why can't we stop the big box stores from selling these fertilizers? And we did try to do that. It's like against the law for us to ban them from selling anything. It's a free market out there. So it's really up to you all who are making the decision when you go to the store. There is a requirement that they post like a fertilizer sign that states like the ordinance. So that should be up there in the retail locations. I know Jacques and Tom are, working with the retail locations to making sure they have the proper signage up there.
Yeah, and here's another question: does liquid fertilizer apply the same as granular? And so all of the ordinance apply to granular, liquid, and typically your liquid is going to be a quick release. And so that is not allowed under the ordinances. Now, we did talk about those exemptions. So fruit trees, vegetable gardens are the exception. So if you're using a liquid fertilizer in your vegetable garden, that is acceptable, but keeping in mind that, it still can, depending on timing, things like that, we still want to follow those best management practices because we like our vegetable gardens, but we also want to have beautiful springs and rivers and things like that. So even though it is exempt, still be mindful about all those best management practices. And you're really going with a granular slow release is the way to go. And let's see, so where can I get lawn fertilizer with a zero phosphorus? That's a great question. And something that we're really working hard on right now is working in the retail space. And so trying to work with local providers, the box stores, the nurseries, things like that, to access them and work with them to provide products that are what we've been talking about today. Of course, you all asking for zero phosphorus products and slow release products and summer blend products is going to be really helpful. And so I know in Seminole County, we hope to have those posters up within the next few months and start really getting them out there. So Orange County's done a great job already at working with the retail space. So we're following their lead in that way.
Yeah, and there's this one question from Daryl about, the weeds in the lawn, and he hands pulls them. And then if you're going to put down grass seed for St. Augustine, how do you fertilize then? So you cannot fertilize before applying the grass seed, and you want to wait until after 30 days from seeding or sodding. But you can plant the St. Augustine either by seed or plugs or sod. Most people do sod if you have a very large, expansive area. If you just have a couple, patchy areas, you could put in plugs at that point.
Yeah, and here's a really good question from Jervin and it's about, does landscape plants include fruits and vegetables? So what if you have a fruit tree in the middle of a stand of turf grass? What do? We fertilize the fruit tree in the way that the fruit tree needs to be fertilized, to the drip line. So if you have the tree, if my trunk is the tree and my branches go out to here, then we will not fertilize past the edge of the branches towards the last branch. That's the drip line, right? And so we want to fertilize within that circle of roots, where we're not going, into the turf grass, because the turf grass is going to need a different support system than the fruit tree. And so we're still able to fertilize that fruit tree, but we want to be kind of following the best management practices for the turf, and then kind of treating the avocado separately, or whatever it may be. Avocado just popped into my head. So, yeah, and really dealing with it in that way. So kind of looking at them separately, but, also recognizing that they're not, they're in the same system, and that if you're fertilizing with a nitrogen slow release for the turf, your tree probably will benefit from some of that as well. And so that soil test will help you. Great, these are great questions, and I see a few people have already signed off, so I'll just give a quick reminder of that survey that I'll be sending here within the next hour. Complete it as soon as possible, but do be mindful that it can take up to 1 to 2 weeks for us to email you your completion of your certificate for your CEUs and provide you those bags of fertilizer. So please be patient with us. We have a lot going on at Extension, and we definitely appreciate your patience. Special thanks to Jacques for moving and grooving for our fertilizer PSAs. And just thank you all so much for being such great partners to bring this fantastic information to the public and our professionals. So, thank you, Tom, who's our fertilizer educator for Seminole County, TSL Basie, who's the UF-IFAS Extension Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent at Orange County, and we have Jacques Worley, who's the Strategic Engagement Coordinator for Orange County Environmental Protection Division, and our behind the scenes support staff. So thank you all. And with that, unless there's any final comments, we will go ahead and close the webinar. Great. Have a great day, everyone. See you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.